To be honest with you, I almost did not make this video. While I have been somewhat successful at trying things with the winter sowing method, I don't think that I am the best at it. And to be fair, I don't really rely on the winter sowing method for growing all of my seeds. I have a nice setup indoors where I grow most of the seeds that I use outside. So winter sowing is kind of like a bonus for me, to say in a nice way. But one of the last videos that I posted about winter sowing that I did a couple of years ago has been getting some traction in the last couple of weeks. And I have been getting a lot of questions regarding some of the things. And that sort of motivated me to try winter sowing again this year. I'm going to do very few seeds and I'm going to show you the process. And I'm also going to answer some of those questions that you guys have had regarding winter sowing. If I remember correctly, this will be the fourth time that I am giving winter sowing a try. And as I mentioned before, depending on the year, depending on the weather, I have had somewhat decent results. The last year that I tried this, which is when I did all the 3 tubs with the small 2.5-inch containers inside, that was probably the worst year. That was the last year that I did it as well. So I used call it quits then. I have one small container here, which is titled Winter Sowing. And I mean, I have plenty of seeds, but I am not going to go crazy because I am only going to do a 10 by 20. I'm only going to fill up a 10 by 20 tray with the small containers. Okay, I think that I have nailed down what seeds I want to start. I'm only going to start 4 different types of seeds. I am going to start with one of my favorites, which is Verbena bonariensis. This is a lovely, lovely plant that I hope that it reseeds well in my garden. And I am going to give it a try. I got these flowers. I got this specifically from Botanical Interest. You can find them at Johnny's. You can find them at Outside Pry. Not a lot of people buy from Outside Pry, which is weird to me. But I think that Pine Tree Seeds also has them as well. I love these, and I know that some of these are older, so that's going to also be a huge consideration. This is 2021, 2022, and 2021. So older seeds, we'll give them a try anyway. I am also going to try Buplorium, which is new for me. And I do have a tray of plugs coming from Buplorium. It's hard for me. Buplorium in mid-March. So I am not going to rely on winter sowing to try these guys, because this is my first time with this seed for me. I am trying it indoors. I gotta say, I am not seeing too much germination just quite yet. But I have a couple of small trays trying indoors with Buplorium, and I am going to give it a try with winter sowing. We'll see how it does. I'm going to try Cosmos. This one is double click mix. I got this from Johnny's, same as the Buplorium from Johnny's. And I am not going to go super crazy with Cosmos this year, but there are some varieties that I'm definitely going to include, and this is one of them. And I am also going to start some straw flowers. And the reason for that is that I really do hope that these guys germinate well, because I already have a tray of straw flowers there. Not a whole tray, but I have a small few soil blacks with straw flowers that I started a few days ago. And the germination is, it's iffy. So I'm going to give this fully a try. Hopefully I get a few extra plants. If not, it is what it is. But that's basically all the flowers that I am going to be trying with winter sowing. As I say, I am not going to be relying on this winter sowing technique to grow these flowers. I already plan to start Verbena bonariensis indoors. I already have Buplorium coming. I am going to start a bunch of Cosmos here around March. And I have straw flowers already growing out there. And I am going to give this a try. And if you have never heard of winter sowing, I highly recommend that you look into it. I will highly suggest that you join a few groups where your locals in your region, in your area, do winter sowing. There is a lot of information out there on how to do it, when to take things outside, what containers to use. There is a lot of it. And just like anything else that involves gardening, there is not one way to do winter sowing. You're going to find that a lot of people prefer to use certain things versus others, and it's just going to depend on what works for you, what you have available, but also it's going to depend on your zone and the area where you live. So in simple terms, winter sowing is just a technique for you to try to grow plants from seed outside during the winter time when it's really cold outside. Now you might be wondering, how are things going to grow when it's cold outside? It just doesn't make sense. And you are right, but the idea is that you're going to provide these seeds with some sort of protection, a type of greenhouse, you may call it, for them to go through the cold process, which is called cold stratification, which is a period of cold basically that the seeds may need. And once the temperatures start to warm up outside, that greenhouse makes the conditions a little bit more cozy, a little bit warmer in there for the seeds to germinate. Now, it may sound as simple as just taking the seeds outside with protection and hoping for the best, but it isn't quite that simple. Just like growing things indoors, you're going to have some struggles for growing the seeds. And the main thing is the weather, and that has been the struggle for me to being successful at winter sowing. Let me get this thing started and then we can get into the Q&A. One of the questions that I got the most on that video was, should I use seed starting mix or potting mix to get my winter sowing going? And again, like I said, it's just going to depend on who you ask. The answer is going to be different if you ask 3-4 people. And for me, the way that I see it, I like to use potting mix. Now, which potting mix? And the answer for that is, it doesn't matter. If you think about it, when the seeds are out in nature, they're not worried about having the best, most fluffy, high quality potting mix. Now, it would be nice if you are able to get something that is not as chunky to help those seeds to germinate, but it's not necessary. And the reason why I like to stay away from seed starting mix, even for the things that I grow indoors, is because I don't really see a huge difference, especially for winter sowing. The seed starting mix that you get at the store, they're not gonna have any nutrients in it. And once those plants, fingers crossed, once those plants start growing outside, they start developing all of the foliage, they're going to need some sort of fertilizer, some sort of nutrient from the soil. And unless you want to be providing fertilizer every 2 to 3 weeks, then I definitely will say get some sort of potting mix. Now, one of the things about finding like the cheapest potting mix to use with winter sowing from one of your local hardware stores is that you don't have to worry about fungus gnats in your room because they're going to be outside. Another question was, do you add water to the soil mix that you use? Do you moist the medium? And the answer is yes. And I actually do this for every time I use potting mix, whether I'm starting seeds indoors, potting up, starting my dahlia tubers. Whether you add the water now when it comes to winter sowing or later, you have to provide water. You have to provide that moisture. You cannot just take the seeds outdoors in potting mix that is completely dry, because at some point you're just gonna have to water. So this is good. It is not soaking wet, but it's nice and moist. Let's see, let's think about this. I want things to have drainage holes, so probably won't use the flat one. I am not going to use a flat 10 by 20 tray here because I want it to have drainage holes. So the easiest thing for me will be to use one of these mesh trays These things are not going to be moving around. They're going to be inside the tub that I am planning to place them in. So this is just for keeping most of the little trays together. As I am adding the soil here, the potting mix, I am just kind of flatten it just a little bit. I am not pushing too much. If we get a lot of snow or if we get a huge rainstorm, these guys are going to get loaded with water. And the last thing that I want is for them to just settle. So by doing this from the beginning, it helps in my opinion. If you're wondering, I'm using these 5x5 trays from Bootstrap, and they do have drainage holes at the bottom. So both the bottom tray and the small trays do have drainage holes, so that I don't have to worry about going out there and emptying the containers if we get a lot of rain. And I am really adding a lot of soil. Hopefully these plants do grow big. I am already counting that these guys are going to be huge. So I'm going to provide them with a lot of room for the roots to spread. So that's why I'm adding a lot of the soil here. Okay, I have my tray here. If I was to get rain or snow, as I mentioned, everything here has drainage holes, both the main bottom tray and the small 5x5 containers that I'm using here. So it is time for me to start adding the seeds. Another question that comes along with winter sowing when people are starting to do this for the first time is, do they need maintenance? Do I have to be out there constantly watering or checking on them? And the answer is yes. And that was my biggest mistake that I make on year one. I simply put everything together for winter sowing. I put them outside and I never really bothered to check. I didn't think that I was going to need to water or that I was going to need to move the containers. When it comes to winter sowing, you rely heavily on Mother Nature to do a lot of the cold stratification. A lot of these seeds here will definitely benefit from going a few weeks on really cold temperatures, but they also need to have moisture to start getting into the process of germinating. If you live in an area where you don't get snow or you don't get a lot of rain, then you need to provide a little bit of water here and there. It doesn't compare as something that you will be growing indoors that you have to water every day or every other day, especially soil blacks. But definitely at least once, twice a week, you definitely have to check for them to make sure they have some sort of moist. And if you also live in an area where sometimes the winters can be a little bit weird, like last year we were in February and we were having temperatures in the 50s, then you might need to move your containers out of the straight sun because they're just going to fry, and that's not going to help the germination process. So it's not something that you can use, set outside and forget about it for the whole winter and hoping that, you know, comes April or whenever it gets warm for you, that you're going to have this beautiful set of plants. You definitely need to keep an eye on them for making sure they have water. And if you get really long periods of warm days, then you need to move them somewhere where they can get a little bit of shade so that the things are not cooking inside the greenhouse. Now, another question, and probably the biggest question, is when do I need to start this winter sowing? And again, it's going to depend on your area. The seeds that I am starting today, most of them are considered cool flowers. So they're going to benefit from being in the cold for a few weeks. And once the temperatures start getting a little bit warm, I'm talking 50s, 60s, then they're going to start to do their thing because they have gone through that period of cold. For me here in central Indiana, I will say that I have a good window from February and March. Now, when I say that, I am relying heavily that the weather is going to be the way that the weather is supposed to be during those months. I'm talking cold temperatures, snow, rain, all of that good stuff for the seeds to get going. And as we all know, we cannot rely on Mother Nature to do that. So this year, because we are getting lots of really cold temperatures here in central Indiana, this is the perfect time for me to get these seeds going, because I know that they're going to get that nice cold stratification time. And then hopefully here in a month or so, once the temperatures start getting in the upper 40s or so, then hopefully these things will start germinating. Now I am emptying most of these because these are older seeds, and fingers crossed here in April or so, I am going to be having a hard time dividing these guys. At least that's the hope. I think that if I say that out loud, maybe it will come out through. So I have 4 of these trays, the small 5x5 containers with Verbena bonariensis. Now for Verbena bonariensis, it says to just cover the seeds slightly. So what I'm going to do is that I am going to use vermiculite instead of trying to get more potting mix. So if you're wondering that, you know, maybe January is a little bit too early for you to take your seeds outside, especially those seeds that enjoy cool weather, don't be, because the seeds are they're not going to come out early. They're just not. But they're going to benefit from having those extra weeks of cold. Another thing that I think gardeners struggle when it comes to winter sowing, especially the first year, is that we have expectations that are similar to the expectations that we had for the seeds that we grow indoors. And that's not going to be the case. When I start seeds indoors for most of my plants, I expect to see some sort of result, some sort of germination within a week to maybe even 3 weeks. And if I don't see any results during that time, then I know that I did something wrong. Maybe the seed wasn't as good, and I start over, or I just try with something else. And that's not really the case for winter sowing. Today is the 23rd of January, and I am taking this outside today. And it's going to be weeks, probably a couple of months before I see anything showing up here as far as germination goes. And that's completely okay. They first need to settle in the cold and process all of that so that when it starts to get warm outside, they can start to germinate. But during that time, I am not just going to leave them alone. I am going to make sure that they have some sort of moist. And it's really easy for me just to get a container of water, and I can just provide them with a little bit of water once a week at least. If we get snow, they'll get that snow, they'll get that water from the snow. If we get rain, the same thing. So I am not going to worry too much about these guys doing something here next week for me. And I think that's one of the hardest things for us gardeners that start things indoors every year, and then we try winter sowing, that we want to see results soon, just like we would indoors. But with winter sowing, you just have to have a lot of patience, and you just have to trust that the seeds are doing what they need to be doing, and that eventually they'll come through. Then I'm going to try straw flower. The seeds that I am using here are the same seeds that I use for my soil blocks, and I have a very, very little germination. So I am hoping that I get few plants from here. And the seeds are old too, so I should have just added a bunch of seeds to the soil blocks, but oh well. Now it doesn't say if I need to cover them. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to add a little bit of vermiculite. Now, what about things that love the heat, like tomatoes or zinnias or sunflowers? You can definitely start your seeds for warm loving plants that way, but you don't need to put them out super early like I am here. If I was starting zinnias or tomatoes in my zone, normally I can transplant those things from the plants the end of April, the first week in May. So if I was trying to grow them with the winter sowing method, I will probably start a month before that. And it may seem like super early, but the thing is that these seeds are not going to be out in the open like this. They're not going to be exposed to the elements. They're going to have a nice greenhouse, which is this clear tub that I show you early, this whole 10 by 20 tray is going to be inside that. So with a day in the 50s and the 60s, the temperature inside the greenhouse, as we're gonna call it, is going to be a lot warmer. So the seeds are going to be there nicely growing. Now, the one thing that you have to be careful when it comes to things that love the warm is not to put them early enough. Here in central Indiana, February or March, we may be getting some nice temperatures outside. And it can be very easy for me to say I'm going to put some tomatoes outside or some zinnias with the winter sowing method. Now, if I start zinnias or tomatoes that early, and if we get temperatures that are kind of up and not as we are used to in February or March, then the seeds might get going and start germinating, and the plants might get kind of big, 2 or 3 inches. But if later in the season, like it's the case here in Indiana, if we get a frost or if we get really cold temperatures overnight, then those plants might just be killed because of the cold temperature. So it's not worth it for you to go through that trouble. You could bring the containers inside, and that's why I'm doing this, because if something happens where it's the end of April and we happen to be overnight in the minus, then I can just grab this whole thing like this in one piece and I can bring them indoors overnight, and it's not a problem. And that's why I choose to do something like this in trays versus using milk jugs, because it's super easy for me to just get one of these indoors instead of having to move 4 or 5 milk jugs and, you know, in and out. So warm loving plants are definitely able to grow this way, but you have to push them outside a little bit later, way later than you would things that can handle the cold. Now, blue porium is one that needs dark to germinate. So I am going to definitely cover this with some soil. Perfect. Now we're with Cosmos next. Another question that I have been getting a lot on that video of winter sowing that I did a couple of years ago is, do containers matter? And the answer for that is no. With the small experience that I have been getting when it comes to winter sowing in the years that I have been trying to get this going, my experience has been that containers don't really matter as much as the conditions that you give those seeds. Now, as long as you provide some sort of greenhouse protection for the containers that you're using, then you shouldn't have problems getting some results. If you have been watching videos for winter sowing, you're going to realize that people get really creative when it comes to choosing the containers for growing their seeds outside. Milk jugs are probably the most common. I have seen people use Ziploc bags. Ziploc bags is just way too involved for me. I mean, this is what I'm doing here. It's already time consuming for me. The reason why I don't really like to do the milk jugs is because if I have to move those containers when the plants are already grown, and if we get like some really warm temperatures, I don't really want those containers out in the full sun. So I will have to move them one way or the other, and moving, I don't know, 20-30 milk jugs is time consuming versus having to move something like this, like I already mentioned. And also I choose not to do milk jugs because while we do drink milk here in my home, I will have to probably collect the jugs throughout the year in order to have at least a few of them available for me. And I'm not that organized. I'm not. Now, if you wanted to go that way, you could go to any of your local coffee shops or Starbucks even, and ask if they have some empty milk containers, and they might be able to help you out. But I don't know. I just don't do that. But there's actually one video that one of my followers did here a couple of years ago. It might have been last year, trying different ways to do this. I think her channel is the Southern Daisy. I am going to link that video below. I'm going to find it for you. But she's in the South, so her conditions are different than mine. And she had some really great results. So I am going to link to that video so you can kind of have an idea of a different way to do things, I guess. Whatever you choose to use, milk jugs, Ziploc bags, empty fruit containers that you get from the grocery store, things like that, just make sure that those seeds, that soil, they're going to have some sort of protection so that they're not just out in the open. Another thing that I have found from people mentioning their successes with winter sowing is that squirrels love to get into these things. Personally, I don't have problems with squirrels. I do have squirrels in my neighborhood, but they seem to leave my things alone for the most part. So I am not worried about them getting into these things at all. I gotta put name tags on these things before I get things mixed up. Now this is the greenhouse, as we're gonna call it, that I'm going to use to place this 10 by 20 tray in here. This is just a regular clear top that I got at Meijer, I believe. And this is one of the ones that I used in that video. It has drainage holes at the bottom. This right here is the bottom, and it has some drainage holes. And the lid also has drainage holes. I gotta hook it up so it's ready for me to take outside. But the whole idea is that this is going to act as the protection for the seeds that I am starting here. In the other video, in the video that I was referring to, I use containers that are the 2.5 inch size, and I place them here, and I was able to start a bunch of those plants that way. I did have some success, but nothing to be crazy about. Now these guys are going to go outside. They're going to go like this. The potting mix that I use here is already moist, so it has plenty of water. If you start your seeds for this method with dry potting mix or dry seed starting mix, whatever you use, you do have to make sure that you water them completely, and you will probably want to do that outside. Again, if we have rain or snow, the snow is able to get through the seeds through the holes on top of the lid. And if we get torrential rain, that this thing is just getting loaded with water, the drainage holes at the bottom, the 5x5 containers that I use have drainage holes. So they are going to drain into the tray that is holding all of the little containers. And this greenhouse also has drainage holes. So one way or another, the water is just going to get out of here. I am going to place this right now outside in full sun. I do want to make sure that the light hits this. I will not want to put this somewhere where it's completely in the shade. And let's just say that here next week we have, I don't know, temperatures in the 50s, which honestly it's Indiana, so who knows. I will just go and take the lid off, or remove the lid, open the lid, and just let these guys breathe, because at 50 degrees these guys are going to cook inside here. It's going to get really nice and cozy here. So keeping an eye on things like that, making sure that you have your things moist. They don't need to be completely soaking wet, but they do need to have some sort of moist in there for the seeds to start developing. Again, I don't expect any of these seeds here to do anything for me for a month, maybe even 2, before I see anything germinating. And hopefully, fingers crossed, this year we'll have great results with winter sowing. And I guess I didn't even think about it until now. By using these containers like this, I can easily remove the lid if I needed to, but once they're locked, the squirrels, if I had trouble with squirrels getting into the containers, they cannot get to it. They really don't have any access to this unless they start chewing off the plastic, which who knows. Thank you for being here, you guys. I hope that this video was helpful. If you are starting your winter sowing, or if you have any tips for me as far as how you do winter sowing and how it works for you, amazing. Let me know in the comments below, and I hope that you have a great week. I hope that you get lots done in the garden, at least indoors, and I hope that your seeds germinate really, really fast.